I'd like to welcome onto the stage one of probably my favorite people. I shouldn't have favorites in AppDynamics. One of my most favorite people in AppDynamics is the general manager of our Emerging Technology business unit, which is probably the place where you get to play with all the cool stuff. So without further ado, Prathap.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to speak really fast and shut up and sit down because we have a fantastic panel. It's the kind of panel where usually they're the ones who are asking me questions. We have a customer. We have two really senior professionals in the industry themselves. So I'm going to have them up to the stage. Victoria, Jim, and Daniel, if you can come up to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for making time to come, Jim. Thank you. I want to give special credit to Daniel. He just flew in flew back from Asia this morning, right? So a lot of coffee, and he'll be signing a book that just came out. So in the reception right after the closing keynote, do go network with Daniel and ask him a lot of questions that I won't be asking today. So thanks for joining. So with that, just want to do quick intros. Victoria, why don't you go introduce yourself?
I'm Victoria Woollaston. I'm currently digital editor at Wired UK, and previously I was science and technology at the Men Online.
Excellent. And then just to get us going, I've requested my panelists to share a fun fact about themselves. And Victoria, your fun fact is?
My fun fact is in 2013, I appeared on Countdown. So if anyone's not in the UK, you won't know what that is.
I read upon this, though.
So my New Year's resolution that year was to get on a TV show. So I applied to Countdown, Eggheads, £1 Million Drop, Mastermind. Got through the first level of Mastermind, got accepted with my specialist subject of Alan Partridge. And then, in all seriousness, and then Countdown got in touch for me to go on there. And then once you've been on Countdown, you can't go on another TV show for a year. So my Mastermind dreams were dashed, only for a year. I will apply again. And I lost, but we won't talk about that.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. All of you have met Jim, but we can't have enough of Jim. So Jim, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm not sure my wife would agree with that. So hi, I'm Jim Korchak. I'm a managing director at Barclays, working in technology, and I look after the team that kind of keep everything up and running. So all the branches, any of you who use your debit card to buy stuff, mortgages, loans, all of it. So when things go wrong, we're the guys. So I'm surrounded by journalists here. Just is this off the record? This conversation.
So today only I get to ask questions.
All right, sorry.
So it is off the records. And your fun fact is?
My fun fact is I actually saved somebody's life by going for a morning run.
How cool is that?
Thank you. Well, let me explain. I'm actually recovering from a broken leg at the moment, but before all that happened, I tend to go for a run a few times a week to just try and stay sane. But because of my work schedule, I go really early in the morning. So usually I'm out the door around 5, which means, especially during the winter, all the street lights are off because to save a few quid, the town shut them off at 11. Don't put them back on till 6. So I have a headlamp, so I look like a running miner. ER, not OR. So I was out running, and I was a few miles in, and it's relatively pitch black, and I see a bicyclist coming towards me, going over a speed bump. I don't think anything of it, and a few moments later, I come up to the speed bump, and I find that gentleman. That gentleman laying in the middle of the road. And so it's a fairly heavily busy, trafficked type of road. Maybe not at 5:15, 5:20 in the morning, but I tried to get him up. First of all, I was hoping he wasn't dead, but then I tried to get him up, and he was convinced that he was laying down on his settee, and he would not budge, and then went back to sleep and was snoring. So I rang the non-emergency police line, and for the next 40 minutes had to try and field cars from running over him, which I have no doubt would have happened because people pretty much caned it down the road. So there you go.
Did he thank you for it?
No, he never. I never got a thank at all, and in fact, he never woke up. He was just snoring the whole time. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I told you guys it's a fantastic panel. So Daniel, thanks for joining us, and I know you've interviewed head of states and leaders and all those. So go easy on me as I ask you questions, okay? So please introduce yourself.
So Daniel Franklin, executive editor at The Economist, and among other things at The Economist, I edit our annual publication on the year ahead with predictions for what's coming up, so the world in whatever the next year is, which is probably the most fun thing I do, and that's just about to, the cycle for that just is about to kick off this month with our first sort of editorial think-in. My fun fact is actually from an interview with the head of state. I was based in Washington in the first Clinton term, and actually at the beginning of his second term in 2007, I had an Oval Office interview, and can't remember all that much about what was said in the interview, but at the end of it, I said, Mr. President, please forgive me for asking this, but my daughter, Cleo, has an autograph book which she got Chelsea, your daughter's autograph in it, and she asked me if you would please sign her autograph book. So there it is, the President signing Cleo's autograph book, and he said, Cleo with an I, is that? He said, yeah. I said, yes. He said, the muse of history. And that was interesting, because he's right. Cleo is the muse of history. And I thought no amount of briefing would have told Bill Clinton to be prepared for that by his staff. So that just shows what a sort of educated character he was, that he knew that. I would doubt very much whether the current president would know that. But it did.
But he might tweet about it.
It did also tell me. I mean, looking back on it now, I realize that it's those surprise things and the personal stuff that you really remember, and I think that applies in lots of areas of life and our work.
Thanks for sharing it. And I was sharing the image that you sent us with my 5-year-old, and then she goes, "Can I meet the president too?" And I said, well, he is ex-president now, so we'll probably meet him. So thanks for sharing that. So with that, I also wanted to kind of repeat. I started reading this book, and I'm an engineer, and the way the book is organized is great. Very rarely do you get to read chapters that have authors with such a range. There's a chapter in there that's written by a venture capitalist, and there's another chapter that's written by a philanthropist. And all of them are talking about trends in technology and how far they'll go and what that means to us as cultures, as citizens. It's a fantastic book, and I already got mine. I just need to get it signed. And the first 50 of you who go to the reception, please feel free to stop by and grab one. So with that, I thought I'll keep it very conversational here. So I'll throw an easy one for you guys, since you're such amateurs. So the first one is, so the topic today is about technology trends in Europe. And the key takeaways from their observations is, how do we get ready for these trends, and what does it mean to us, and so on. So the first one, I wanted to do more of a retrospective, and I wanted to start with Victoria and ask, let's go back a little bit before we go into the future trends. And if there was one trend that either surprised you in a very positive way, I didn't see that coming, that was awesome, it just totally surprised me, or a trend that you thought was pretty cool, but totally flopped. So if you want to start us off, that'll be great.
So I'm a bit controversial. I actually think Google Glass is something that had a lot of potential, but the thing that had potential in Google Glass was AR, augmented reality. And I remember seeing a very early version of Blipper, where you could scan a bottle and it would show you an advert. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, what's the point? Like, you could just go online. If you want to watch an advert, you see adverts everywhere, you get bombarded with them. Well, why would you actively go and see one? And then Pokemon Go happened.
Yeah.
And I still play Pokemon Go with a 6-year-old. I know him, it's not just a random 6-year-old. And suddenly you start to see that Pokemon Go was what took augmented reality into the masses. But now you know that you can see that augmented reality is in so many other things that people didn't realize it was AR. So with HoloLens, with their mixed reality, the way that works is just another version of Google Glass, but done in a slightly slower way. I think Google wanted to be ahead of the trend on it, and all the privacy issues that came with that. But the stuff that you're seeing that is developing now that people want to use is the stuff that was built into Google Glass, just under a different moniker. So I think that's quite interesting.
That's great. How about you, Jim?
So I'll take a bit of a slightly more pessimistic view, in so much that I've always been a bit of an Apple fan, and I think the trend that I'm not sure we had the sort of momentum that, or probably didn't end up with the momentum we thought it might, right, was probably the adoption of Apple Watch. And I think, but I think it uncovered something that we've learned, right, which is, and we're seeing this now within currently, which is the user interface into technology, right, that landscape is broadening, but there's really a use for every type of tool and every type of interface. And I think what that uncovered, or what the Apple Watch trend uncovered, is, it's really good for certain use cases. As a runner, I love it. I like to be able to go in after I run and buy a Costa coffee if it's open, right? But right therein, its utility sort of fades away because because of the size limitation and some of that other stuff. So I think there's still work to be done in terms of how technology companies consider the end user and the consumer experience, and how to marry that up with the right channel. And so I think we'd like to see more of that come.
That's great. Daniel?
Well, there's the tech example that I would give to you that I'm most fed up with, and that I feel never quite works for me, which is the connected fridge. And it just seems to me that whenever anybody wants to talk about the embedded chips and everything, they say, well, your fridge will tell you. For Christ's sake, I know what's in my fridge. I don't need this connected fridge. And then the trends that surprise me have really been the ones that have come from places that you wouldn't, either that have combined different technologies and produced something new. So I think, the whole sharing economy is based on that, different business models suddenly bringing together lots of different platforms and technologies very powerfully. So Uber suddenly was possible, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that. And then the one that completely, who would have thought that Africa would be the pioneer in mobile money, Kenya, happening earlier than elsewhere. So I think we should look in unexpected places for what's coming.
That's great. Thanks. So then switching to something of a trend currently, and in fact this morning at the keynote we were talking about how as technologists we are going from, we believe, kind of a system of record, system of engagement, to what we call, and what Jim was mentioning in the video earlier today, around systems of intelligence. So just to set up a bit of a context there and ask you a question, we are seeing some of that development reach to a stage where it's actually practical for big enterprise to use. For example, much of the industrial Industry 2.0 or Internet of Things that we talk about is, we have customers in Germany, and I was there a few months ago, and it's impressive to see, as an electronics engineer myself, it's impressive to see finally the things that I used to work on in the labs are out there in those connected cars. So and there's a lot of predictive analysis around maintenance of those. And right here, in a startup that was just founded 4 years ago, perhaps, DeepMinds, now part of Google, and a lot of application around AI has been evolving. And that's the topic, during my college years was almost a given up topic. Because in the perfect combination of the processing power and data coming together in economy scale just didn't exist at that time. So around automation and the rise of intelligent systems, I have a question, and feel free to take whichever slant you want to. And our audience here is very technical, and a lot of them come from depending on automation and some systems already. I would love for you to share your views on the topic, and perhaps share some challenges that you foresee, whether they are pure technology challenges or organizational policy, politics type of challenges you see with this rather sensitive topic.
Well, I think there's so many headlines at the moment about robots, automation taking our jobs. And we ran a piece by a venture capitalist on the site called Joe Lonsdale, and he was talking about, yes, it's inevitable, robots, automation will take your jobs, but better ones will actually end up emerging. The robots will do all the jobs that take up a lot of your time, the admin stuff that we might not necessarily want to do, which then frees us up to be more creative, to do more of the research, to actually advance technologies further because the technology is helping us. And on the back of that, suddenly your skill as this creative being, which is harder to do in the DeepMind has found so many problems with actually trying to mimic the human brain when it comes to creativity, suddenly you're more valuable. So yes, the robots will take your job, but what you'll end up is a job that actually will pay you more because you have these skills that are suddenly a lot more rare because these machines are doing the other work.
I want to imagine my manager is sitting somewhere here. I think Victoria just said I should get paid more for using automation.
Very valuable.
Yes, thank you. Jim?
So, I think you touch on a sensitive topic, right? And I think it really comes down to the context through which you consider artificial intelligence. So, we use it already today inside of financial organizations, like inside of Barclays, but we use it to protect our customers, right, from fraud. So we can use and we can understand how they normally interact with our systems, or who they normally send money to, et cetera, to try and intervene if we think, for some reason they've been breached, right? So it can be used, equally for good. At the same time, right, I think one of my trends and one of the things I hate is, it was my boy's 5th birthday. I don't hate that. That was good. And so I went online to buy him some football kit, right? And then what I found for the next, pretty much 2 weeks was every advert was about football kit. But I bought it on the day, so that's not very useful to me. But where I think artificial intelligence will help is to add utility to our experience. So by understanding some of the things or life events through big data, they might be able to connect us with things we're going to need soon. The idea being, if somebody has a life event, knowing, well, maybe a new addition to the family, do you need a bigger car? Do you need, these are the things that I think will hopefully be not after the fact marketing, or it'd be more utility for people to make their lives easier. And I think there's an area where you probably see it emerge ever more.
Well, just to pick up on the jobs thing, because that strikes me as one of the. I think going around discussing AI with people in different contexts, there's 2 issues that really come up most often. One is, is it going to turn around and do scary things to us? And secondly, about jobs. And the most immediate one and concern is about jobs. And I think I broadly agree with Victoria that it'll we'll learn to work well with machines, and it'll over time enhance people's work. But I think there's good news and bad news. Over time, we will settle down into a new economy where we figure out whole completely different types of activities, I'm sure, will emerge from this. Everybody in this room is doing jobs that didn't exist before the digital revolution, let alone the industrial revolution. So we're incredibly adaptable. But I'm not sure that I think there is a genuine problem, and we'd be probably dangerous to ignore it, that the new jobs don't necessarily come at the same rate as the old jobs are being machined away or roboted away, and they don't necessarily come for the same people who are losing their old jobs. So that there's potentially a very large transitional problem, which is in turn quite a big political problem to handle. So I think there's a difference between the macro and the long term, where I think the news is probably pretty good, and getting through from here to there, which I think is much trickier and a genuine dilemma for just about every level. Individual companies grappling with transition, governments grappling with how to deal with this, international arrangements on trying to avoid trade wars and that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those insights. And I can confidently say, and having had to work with my very busy panelists with their schedules, doing research on them and collecting the fun facts from them, there is no panel host automation coming anytime soon. It's quite a job. So
might be quite fun though, what if we replaced you with a hologram?
That might avoid the jet lag issues. Yeah, that actually would be quite good. So thank you for that. So moving to the next topic, which is quite near and dear to most of us geeks in the room. is the idea of connected consumers, customers, and a lot of immersive experiences that we're seeing more and more. And we've already seen, to your point earlier, Daniel, around where there has been a vertical industry disruption, whether it is the sharing economy or new embedded, sensor-driven verticals. We're seeing that quite a bit already. And the question is around how, over the years, the things that we care about a lot are applications, whether it's a banking application or a monitoring application. They've already started getting factored into smaller form factor. They've become 10 apps and 100 microservices and so on, and that's the trend that we see. And with it comes a different type of user experience and a different type of approach and engagement. And it's a big trend, even in big enterprise these days. So the question is, as enterprises seek to enhance that experience, the totally immersive experience for the customer, whether it is the AR-induced data everywhere, contextual data, or other systems. The question is, where is that trade-off between personalizing it too much versus the core performance of systems such as that? What are the trade-offs, and then at what point do these cool apps become creepy apps? Right, so that's the next question. Daniel, if you want to start first.
Well, it's sort of picking up where Jim was talking. If the app starts to know when a big family event is coming up, do you suddenly say, how did you know, we were expecting a baby or something like that? That could easily become creepy, although I suspect that we just get used to that more and more. We just get used to machines knowing more about our life. Occasionally the antennae will twitch and we'll think, well, what am I giving away that knows that, or how on earth did the machine know that? But I think over time we'll just get used to it. And it seems to me that the key is for this to become as seamless and as natural as possible. And I think natural language makes a lot of difference here to increasingly just talk to your app. And also behind it all, and you will know a lot more about this than I will, the data integration, that's the real prize, the getting actual systems that are currently often too disparate to talk to each other and produce something really useful. That's where you get the really big gains.
Great.
Yeah, so I tend to agree. I think the kind of end user experience and the kind of connected customer and the microservice sort of shift, I don't know that they're necessarily mutually exclusive from one another, right? So I think what you're likely to see in terms of a connected customer is if you consider today, you could be watching a movie on the train home, get into your house, and then flip it up onto the screen, and there's that at home, that ability to shift between medium of connectivity. I think you're going to likely see the shift of usability towards that. So I might start a transaction on my mobile phone, and then walk up to a device or walk up to a shop front and continue it, there. And I think that seamless experience transitioning between the different channels, as long as there's a need, or as long as we can drive a better customer experience, a more efficient customer experience, people will adopt it. But I think to your point, where it gets creepy is I think when people feel like the privacy is being breached in some way. But to Daniel's point, right, I think that the march is towards, if you'll get a better user experience, right, if you can get some utility out of giving up a bit of your privacy, you find actually the trend is for people to sort of slightly move towards that. I think we just got to be careful that it isn't a march in sort of millimeters towards, a point of no return, right, for the consumer.
Don't you think you could imagine it going the other way? Sorry, okay to it. That beyond a point, you'll start to get irritated if you have to sort of start back and sort of start entering or telling them information that you feel they should know already, so that you will almost start to expect the machines to know stuff that nowadays we might be surprised that they do.
I think one of the biggest problems is that a lot of us will be willing to give, like you said, a lot of us will be willing to give up certain amounts of our information to get good service. But it's when the companies are a little bit vague about what they'll do with that information. I think that's where I think all of us would admit, we're fine for you to use it, but when your T's and C's say, we might use it for X, Y, and Z. And then as a journalist, certainly Daniel will attest to this, you go to these companies and you go, well, in your T's and C's it says you might do. And they're like, yeah, but we never will. I'm like, well, say that then. Say in your terms and conditions, we will not use it for this. And then suddenly you're opening up people to trust. And I think that's the biggest thing with these intelligent systems is trusting them. Yeah. They are in your home, they are in your car, they are with your family all the time. It does suddenly become this very AI film dystopia type thing, but we want to move away from that. We want to be able to trust these machines. Yep. For those sorts of things.
It's a really good point. By show of hands, how many people read the end user license agreement to see what they're going to do, what they're not going to do? Right? The answer is very few of you, because I know I generally don't have the time. And,
yep.
So it's a very, very compelling point.
Yeah, and that's hopefully where some of the policy kicks in on behalf of the real end users. I'll tell you, at home I have 2 little kids, and I already see, one is 8 and the other is 5, and I already see clear preferences between them. The 5-year-old just wants the same voice, whether it's living room Alexa or in the car. She's quite confused why Alexa is not in the car and Siri is not in the the computer. And the 8-year-old trying to explain to her, why that is, and why different car manufacturers versus home equipment, they're all different. And a 5-year-old goes, I don't get it. It works. They should make it work. So the next question is around. In fact, some of you touched on this already. It's about our relationship with data. Clearly, there's a lot of data being generated. There's a lot of processing power now available to very accurately use it for different use cases. And yet, a lot of it is not used or underused, and I can tell you from the vendor side of things. And it's a very broad topic that we talked about a little bit. How do you see our relationship with data evolving? Whether it is the way we tend to derive value from it, how we want to secure it, and how we want to answer some of the ethical questions that come out from the availability of such data.
I've always been a digital journalist, but coming into Wired, where we've got the magazine, the print side as well, I've always used data, and the fact you go into the print organisation and they go, well, why are we using data that's old? Like, why? And I was like, because we don't have data that's in the future. We only have data to use that we've got in the past. And a lot of them are going, well, as I trust my journalistic instinct, I know what's going to do well. I'm like, that's fine, but we also have data to back that up. We can also look at that data and go, okay, well, we know that a certain story on a certain topic will do well, but how well? When should we set it live? At what times? The downside to that, which is what I try and also get across to my team, is that I am not just governed by data. I need to get this the right way around now. We are data informed, not data driven. So we have this data and we know that a story about Facebook will do particularly well on a Wednesday at midday. But then it's up to us to do that story. It's then up to us to make that editorial decision. So only because the data is there, we shouldn't just be relying on it solely to be able to do what we should be learning from it. And that's the downfall of data as well, though, because suddenly a data set, all 4 of us could look at the same data set and take away something different. And it's interpreting that data, which is the big challenge I think we face of having, the more you have, the harder it is to interpret.
Yes. I suspect Jim would have a strong view about this because they have a lot of data.
Yeah, I think I think again, right, I think Victoria brings up a really good point, right, which is in order for you to understand the obvious trends, you need not much more than a spreadsheet and a kind of understanding of the data. But really, if you believe that data is the new oil, right, which is kind of the going sort of phrase, it really comes from understanding the actual micro trends or the multivariable trends, right? So humans are really good at kind of understanding 1 or 2 variables, and you get to 3 or 4, and it's harder for us to pick out the trends. When you get into 5, 6, 7, 8 variables, it's impossible for us to do. So you turn to machine learning, right? And what we're able to do is help provide insights to our customers on, by having a very large data lake and say, well, for your postcode, the average person pays this for electricity. You know how much you pay. Figure out what you want to do with that information, right? So, right, there's a utility and a usability, and it's about, trying to help the customers of our organization to understand trends or data that was completely opaque to them previously, right? So you can do some really good things with that, and you can try and help people and do the right thing. So there's a positive ethical side to this. Equally, right, there's the kind of controlling, finding trends or I guess marketing and selling ideas that might be less ethical. And so I think it's one of these topics where it'll be debated, and as we see it permeate, commerce more and more, ubiquitously, that debate will continue, and I think will become more enriched by the experience. At the moment, we're still at the very early stages of what this looks like.
That's great. Daniel?
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. You mentioned data as oil, where there's a nice phrase in the book that 19th century was powered by steam, 20th century by oil, and the 21st will be powered by data, which I think is true. But that raises, I think, a couple of important points. One, as you say, we're in the very early days. I think there are all sorts of industries which have barely begun to see the impact of what data could potentially do, and I think healthcare is an obvious area of that, where data exists, is poorly captured so far. It's in silos often. We don't capture a lot of the data we generate ourselves and integrate it with other data, but when we do all of that, potentially incredibly powerful. But the second point is, I think, the oil analogy is a good one, and oil had, generated big, powerful monopolies which government had to come in and in some cases break up and deal with. And I think we're rapidly probably getting to that stage with data as well, that the control over the data and the concentration of that control with a few tech giants is going to become a big issue, and something that governments will or should start to take an interest in. And the difficulty is, compared with oil, it's much, much more complicated to know what to do with it. But I think it's time to start thinking about it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Jim, I want to start this one with you. This is a question of career for most of us in the room, which is, as we evolve our careers in line with all these trends, whether it's new capabilities or all these new services that we're consuming rather than constructing them. We used to be, most of us in the IT, we used to build what our businesses need. Now we're either renting it or just building a wireframe that connects them. So as these trends come to life, what's your advice for people in line of IT and IT operations in terms of getting ready for these trends?
I think it kind of goes back to data at some level. So, in terms of your career, if it's in the world of IT operations, the data and the more complicated the landscape becomes, right, the more challenging it is for humans to understand. So I go back to, and I guess it's going to be kind of a shameless plug for what's going on today to a certain degree, but getting the insights and understanding the insights and how you can affect that becomes actually the play, not how quickly can I get something that went down to come back up, right? So it's really about being proactive, not reactive, in terms of trying to drive those improvements. I think the IT ops person of the future is going to be able to use predictive modeling to understand choke points, et cetera, ahead of time, not, hey, we just hit one, how do we then, solve that problem, or, go beat up a developer, right? I think if you look out more broadly, it's always challenging to, if you're thinking about career and want to take your career, if there's anyone here who's at the start of theirs, is, you got to take a bit of a punt on where you see the trends going yourself, or read up and maybe read a book, right? And try and see where some of the people who are future thinking about the industry think it's going. And if you get a point of convergence with a few sources, then it's kind of likely that's going to be a likely outcome. So you might want to try and get yourself on a crash course with wherever that point of convergence is, because that's where you'll capitalize.
Keep learning.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jim. Victoria and Daniel, any career tips for us technologists?
I think we've made the point earlier that we're very early into this. So yes, IT is a lot older, but we're very early into this intelligent systems and automation and everything. The positive from that is that you guys are already an advantage to a lot of other people. You already have the mindset of a technologist. You already think that way. So my advice would be, don't be afraid to try things, experiment, because we are really, really early on. So there may be things, there may be skills that you go, I really want to try that and it doesn't work. But then there'll be lots of people trying it. And between you, you'll be able to find a solution to something. So I think really, although yes, IT is changing, and probably it might seem that IT is the most under threat from these sorts of things, you're actually in a better mindset than a lot of other people who are complete digital noobs. They don't know anything about it. So I think there's a real positive thing to take from that.
Well, I wouldn't presume to give career advice in IT because that's really beyond me, but I will relate an anecdote, which is I was asked a really good question, actually in San Francisco last month, which is, what would you like your granddaughter to study? First of all, I don't have a granddaughter yet, so first of all, I'd like a granddaughter, but given that, but I really had to think about that, and I thought, well, you know, obviously I'd be very happy if she was brilliant at coding, and I'd be happy if she was a geneticist or one of these coming branches of science. But actually, on reflection, I said I'd be very happy if she studied history, because I think in our obsession with technology, we sometimes forget the deep context and the patterns of the past and a broader perspective. So a little bit of a plea, I suppose, to bear in mind the humanities as we get very geeky as well. And I think often those really top-notch technologists have a very broad perspective as well. They're not narrow. So I suppose it's a bit of a suggestion of being as broad as one can while maintaining actually a specialism.
Thanks for sharing that. So one last question. I want to end with a bit of a crystal ball gazing. So if you want to bring up one or two things that you want to predict next few years or decades. I want to start with Victoria. Where are you signing on the paper saying, I, Victoria, predict this to happen, and when?
Personalized medicine. I think medicine that's actually tailored to you, whether that's based on your DNA, whether it's based on your behaviors, but drugs that treat you. So the NHS has a huge problem because you have people, well, the autism spectrum, for example, it's a spectrum for a reason. You've got completely different scales of it. You can have someone who functions very well day-to-day life, and you have someone who really struggles with it. So trying to find one catch-all treatment for that huge spectrum of people is really difficult. So I imagine that personalised medicine, using AI, using machine learning to learn more about these people will be, and I don't actually think it's that far off. I'd say 5 years.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to call you in 5 years.
I think from a customer experience and user interface perspective, it won't be long before the interface in terms of what you want to achieve is through thought, right? So I think that's where it's got to head, because as much as I love my Alexa, I don't want to use it on the train because I might not want people around me to know what I'm doing, right? And equally, we worry about people, looking over your shoulder while you're on your phone or on your laptop. So I think that will emerge in the future as a means of interfacing. But I think another thing that will probably happen is, if I look at the financial services, I think 30, 40, 50 years out, maybe even sooner, it'll be completely disintermediate. So the idea is it'll be almost like, your balance or paying something it will be like a utility off the side of you trying to do something else, like purchase something or go on a holiday, right? And I don't think the concept of a bank or many services that we have today will exist anymore. There'll be, services that get consumed on the way to achieving something else.
I was going to say that, so I'll have now to think of something different. Sort of not so much the financial services, but the thought, the computers that are plugged into us. And Elon Musk is now investing in this, so he's a smart guy. He probably knows what he's doing. A generic prediction of speed. I think technology, various or a lot of trends coming together to mean that the pace of change is going to speed up. One specific thing that I would predict is that we'll eat totally different types of food as a result. To feed the 10 billion, part of what we eat will be meat produced from cell culture rather than from live animals, and that this will be unleash a titanic battle between the Frankenfoods lobby that will say this is a terrible thing, you've got to eat natural stuff, and the animal rights lobby that will say it's a wonderful thing because you're not having to kill animals in order to get the meat. So our diets will change as a result.
One thing I'd like to say that I don't think we're going to see is flying cars. So I think as much as the likes of Uber are all it's sort of a bit of a champion of the company at the moment, I think we might see jets and planes and things that become cheaper so we can use them more freely. What I don't see is this flying car trend taking off at all, excuse the pun.
So, that's a good point. I don't know, because I think if you marry up the kind of, and one of the things I love, right, is when Tesla, right, released as a software release, auto driving, right, and everyone would add their Tesla, automatically got it overnight, right, so that's pretty cool. But if you, for the purposes of like accidents, right, you'd say, well, we can't have flying cars, right, but if flying cars are not piloted by humans, then you probably could have flying cars, in so much that air traffic control would be controlled, hopefully without defects, but, would be controlled that way. So it's feasible from a safety perspective if that was the kind of angle you were taking. But the other thing on the the other one I want to cover is I thought this was interesting is the animal rights people would say it's fantastic, we don't have to kill animals, but we would then have extinction events because what's the utility of having a cow then? So if you look at something like the American buffalo, was on the verge of extinction until they learned it was a much healthier version of beef, and now they're thriving. So there's this really interesting.
So I can't imagine animal rights people saying eat meat because that'll keep the cow. But
no, but I think it'd be one of these be careful what you wish for kind of things, right?
Yeah. I don't know about the cars, by the way, because I mean I was almost thinking of that as that cars are always brought up as the example of the thing that never happened, aren't they? You had all these wild technology predictions, but where are the flying cars? And it's the sort of uselessness of predictions because people said they'd come and then they don't. But now this week actually we've had all these stories about suddenly flying cars are all the rage, and maybe you could imagine that they're more feasible now than they have been for a long time anyway, or something that maybe closely resembles a car but may not be quite a car.
Yeah, I think that was my point. That's my point. I don't think you're ever going to see the jet
driving
style
along,
VTOL takeoff, and I think it's all going to be down to policy. I would love the idea of a flying car, but I think it will come down to policy. I think it'll be the amount of policy we've had about self-driving cars, of even giving that sort of a one-ton machine travelling down a road without any interaction, put it up in the air. And I think Elon Musk at TED this week was talking about how what if a hubcap comes off and guilloties me? That's a bit dramatic, but it's that sort of point.
Sure, I mean.
But why would you need a hubcap if you don't need wheels?
Most of us in the audience are dreaming about flying data centers with hard backups. I think that would make it really easy for us. So that's time for us. Thank you so much. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thanks for joining.